What's up, everyone? We're back. I'm Dr. Shah.
Dr. Maxfield.
And welcome back to our channel, Doctorly, where we talk about all things skincare and dermatology. And today we have a very dermatology topic. Today we are talking about warts.
Right, so this is something you have probably had, someone you know has had them or has them. Most of our focus is going to be on the extragenital warts, but what is it about these little viral infections that are so frustrating and difficult to treat?
Yes, commonly affecting the hands and the feet, but can really be anywhere. They can be on the body anywhere. They could be on the face. They can be on the genitals. So we're going to be talking about warts, what causes them, how you get them, and all the different treatments out there, all the way from hypnosis down to the treatments that we have in the office. So all things warts, here we go.
Here we go.
First, let's talk about what are warts exactly. Because there are a lot of things that warts are not, but a lot of people don't really realize how warts even start in the first place. Because if you know what causes warts, you kind of know how you get them in the first place. So what is the main cause of a wart?
So a wart is a virus, and viruses are interesting. Like if you think of how viruses are for a computer, it's actually very similar to how viruses interact with our body. So this little non-living organism, which is a unique conundrum, actually finds little microscopic breaks in our skin. Once it gets through the skin barrier, it infects the basalis layer, the stem cells in the basal layer of our skin. So every time our skin replicates, the wart hijacks our machinery and it replicates. So it actually uses our cells to propagate its own survival and grow.
So this HPV, or human papillomavirus, is able to integrate itself into our DNA. And by doing that, into the DNA of our skin cells, it's able to basically propagate its own survival. So it does things to basically make it so these cells can't be killed and continue to replicate rapidly. And that's what causes this hyperkeratotic wart that you see on the skin. And so in order to do that, it also needs a lot of blood flow. And so it also does something called angiogenesis, where it increases the blood flow to these lesions so that they have the support and nutrients necessary to survive. And so because it's a virus, how does it spread?
The first step is you need to break in your skin barrier. Our skin has a barrier. It is a barrier to protect us from outside things getting in. And so people who have jobs where they work with their hands, or hobbies where they work with their hands, get a little micro trauma, or people with atopic dermatitis where the skin barrier is not actually very robust to begin with, those are the people who are going to get the most warts. They're going to get a lot of warts because the virus can get into the skin there first.
Right. So basically this virus, let's say for example, I have a wart on my hand and I'm kind of like, my hands are macerated from lifting weights, and then I lift the weight, I have a wart, and then somebody else lifts a weight and they also have some little breaks in their skin. They can get a wart from lifting weights. And that's because the virus sits there. So it can pass from person to person. So I could touch Dr. Maxfield and give him my warts. It's not like that easily transferable. It's not like if I touch him once, he's going to get it. He has to have the break in the skin. My wart needs to be irritated. Or it can spread from person to thing and then thing to person. So we call that a fomite, that thing that is transferring it to somebody else. So those are the main ways that people get warts. And then if you have warts already, you can spread warts to yourself. We call that auto-inoculation, meaning like if I have a wart on my face and I shave over it and then I shave this part of my face, I could spread the warts to this side of the face. If I have a wart on my arm, I scratch it and then I touch my face, I could spread the wart from my arm to my face. So these are essentially contagious infections, not contagious in the sense that like if I were to breathe on him, he's going to get it, but contagious meaning it can spread from person to person, or you can infect yourself.
Right, exactly. And we see this all the time. I say that classically, like women shaving their legs, you just get these lines of warts that go up the legs that get spread against by the razor. But how do you know if you have a wart? So now you know how you get it, whether it was touching someone else or just touching an object or a door handle. But what does it actually look like? So close up, you have an exophytic, or a bump, basically, an exophytic growth or a bump. It is quite scaly. And then one of the key distinguishing features that people will often say is it has seeds. Well, this is the angiogenesis that Dr. Shah was mentioning. These are the little blood vessels actually that have thrombosed, little thrombosed capillaries. This is diagnostic. This is pathognomonic. So if you see this clinically, it is a wart. It is no longer a corn. It is not molluscum. It is not whatever else you think it is. It is a wart with all of these features present.
Right. So probably the two things that we're trying to distinguish between is like a wart and a corn, specifically on the foot. And when you see those blood vessels, it's a wart. It's a slam dunk wart, which makes it much more difficult to treat. So that's a wart. That's what it looks like. Now, those are your prototypical warts, your common warts, but you can also get flat warts, and we'll show you a picture of what that looks like. You can have genital warts that can look slightly different. You can have bonoid papulosis, which is related to the HP virus, not technically a wart, but they can look different and they can have different shapes, but the prototypical wart is very hyperkeratotic, meaning that it's going to have quite a bit of texture to it.
So now you think you have a wart. If there's any question, you can see a dermatologist and they should be able to figure this out for you. But when it comes to treatment, there's a lot of different ways you can attack it. So we said if you know what causes it, you can know how to treat it. So all of these treatments are going to be based off of how they work.
Right. So we're going to organize, because there's so many different treatments out there, the best way to organize this is by the mechanism of action of the different treatments. But we'll also break those mechanism of actions down to what's available at home to you and what you'll have to see a dermatologist for treatments. And before we go on to that, it's really important, worth noting, when we're doing research for any of these videos, there was one statement that really stood out to me that I think is the most important thing that I tell my patients and the most important thing for you to take away from this video. There is no single, before we go on to treatments, there is no single treatment that has been proven to be effective in all patients. Meaning that just because you tried something or just because your dermatologist did something doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And just because your friend did something doesn't mean it's going to be work for you. There is no single treatment that has been shown to be effective in all people. And most people will benefit from some type of combination treatment in order to see results. And so very important going into this, that just because you try something, don't get frustrated. You may need to try many things before you see results. And the second part of this, so I don't have to say this over and over again, is that many times warts resolve on their own, especially in children, which makes it very difficult to evaluate the efficacy of any treatment, because a lot of times you do the treatment, you see the resolution, you don't know whether or not that thing was going to resolve on its own or it got better because of the treatment. And that's why warts and things like alopecia areata and other conditions that come and go, they tend to be very difficult to assess efficacy because you don't know if it just went away on its own.
Right. I think one statistic we'll commonly see is 70% of the warts that you have will go away over the course of a year. Inherently, we see the 30% that don't, so we kind of see the ones that don't resolve in the office. But yeah, it is possible that no matter what you do, there's a good chance it's going to go away by itself. So when we think of HPV, there are broadly two categories, oncogenic and non-oncogenic types, and it has to do with what genes they actually selectively interfere with. So oncogenic types are the cancer-causing ones. Of the hundreds types of HPV, there are select ones that are more prone to causing cancer. This is most relevant for the genital warts and cervical cancer. However, you can rarely get wart-induced squamous cell skin cancers, on the hands and nails. It actually is a contributing factor combined with the majority, which is sun. Then the non-oncogenic types, that's the majority of what you see. That's the vast majority of what you're going to be dealing with, what we're dealing with. They mutate and they cause growth, but they don't directly cause cancer at any point.
So the reason we decided to include this in this video is because the type of HPV is actually really important to what it does. So a wart on your hand can be HPV type 1. So does that HPV type 1, if you were to touch your groin, is this something that could cause cervical cancer, or is this something that could cause genital warts? And generally the answer is going to be no, because the ones that cause cancer are the ones that are HPV 6, HPV 11, HPV 16, HPV 18, HPV 33. These ones have been shown to be high risk HPV subtypes. They're the ones that cause genital warts, and they're the ones that cause cervical cancer. These are the ones that the vaccine targets, and these are the ones that you have to worry about. So when you have a wart on your finger, it doesn't mean that it's going to go on to cause cervical cancer, because it's just not the strain of HPV that causes that. So this is very important for you to know. And if you're getting a pap smear that's looking at HPV subtypes, you're worried about the high risk ones, not the ones that are low risk, not the ones that are on your fingers or your feet.
So if you have a wart, what do you do? So we'll talk about the treatment options you have at home, because this is one of the things where you're going to try a lot. There are a lot of different treatments for this. Some work okay, some work better than others, but there's not one slam dunk thing that is going to always take care of this. So simply, if you want to start at home, here's kind of the spread of options that you have available to you.
So first, let's start into the category. I don't even know what to call this category. I'm calling it the mythical, the at-home category, the ones that have been passed on from generation to generation. And one of the first ones you'll hear about is hypnosis.
Yeah, I've never been hypnotized myself. I actually don't hear much about it anymore. I don't think there is much evidence for it here. And while the mind is a very powerful thing, like psychosomatic responses are very real, Hypnosis is not a tried and true, not a consistent treatment for warts. However, like, it would be a really interesting thing to be a part of. So look out one day, hypnotize Dr. Maxfield. Could be a fun thing, but for warts is not something that I would pursue.
Right. We even had, when we were training together, there was somebody who said that they could speak warts out of existence. Like, they could basically like whisper to them and they could make them disappear. Again, this goes back to the concept of sometimes warts resolve on their own. So you don't know if it's because you're speaking to them or hypnosing them that they go away. So I don't think this is a legitimate treatment in my mind. Then you go on to things that maybe have some studies behind. So there's a study that shows that rubbing garlic on it could somehow have maybe anti-virucidal benefits to it. Could be beneficial. Let's go to the one that has probably the most studies on it for the at-home mythical treatments, and that's actually duct tape.
Right, so this works in a few different ways. One of the ways is purely through irritation. The key goal with this wart virus, if you can get your immune system to recognize this virus exists on your skin, you're set, you're golden. That wart and the others on your body are going to resolve because your body will mount an immune response. So even if purely through irritation, the duct tape might bring attention to this area. Also through occlusion, it is like kind of destructive and macerates the skin. Some of the studies are actually pretty convincing though, and so I think passed down from generations. I know this is something I did when I was a kid, something I'd heard about. I don't know how old this goes back, but there is actually a decent amount of data that this might be helpful.
Yes, so they've done a bunch of studies on this. Some studies, they say it's not helpful versus placebo, which is doing nothing essentially. And then there's some studies even compared it to freezing it, which is kind of like the gold standard of treatment. And they've compared the two and they actually found duct tape to be more effective. So I think this is one of those things that are at home is probably worth trying if you don't want to try the other options out there. I think putting duct tape, occluding it on it, doing it for several weeks at a time could be beneficial for various reasons. We don't know exactly why, but there are some studies to support it.
Right. And I will say one tip for doing this, if this is the route you decide to go, is try to spare the skin around the wart. Actually, it's probably a common theme for most of these. Like, whatever you do to the wart, try to spare the skin around it, because the wart skin is so thick, resistant, and everything you're doing is kind of like destructive or damaging or irritating. It's far more likely the normal skin surrounding the wart is going to break down first. So really try to keep your treatments focused to the wart itself.
The next category is your destructive treatments. So to Dr. Maxfield's point, with these, you really want to target the wart itself. So this is not, and we're going to go into other ones that are going to stimulate your immune system to fight off the HPV virus. And we're going to talk about other ones that are like maybe killing the virus itself. But this is specifically just destroying the lesion. We're killing it and we're killing everything in its path. So this is something that is just truly destructive. And I think probably let's go into the over-the-counter available at-home options first before we talk about the in-office procedures.
Right, so at home you have salicylic acid. Salicylic acid, we know beta-hydroxy acid, it is an exfoliant, and the concentrations you're going to be using for warts are much different than what you use for your face. Like, you're talking about 2% sal acid for acne, you're talking about 40% sal acid for a wart, and you can even get compounded in prescription like 70% salicylic acid, and trust me, it is a lot more effective. There is a huge appreciable difference with the concentration change. Now, again, this is not only going to break down the wart, it is going to destroy the surrounding skin, so keep it focused on the area.
So this is something that is widely available over the counter. Like Dr. Maxfield said, you're looking for those higher concentrations that are specifically made for warts. Sometimes they have these in liquid. Sometimes they have these patches that are essentially impregnated with this high concentration of salicylic acid. How do you use these? You're meant to actually soak your wart in warm water if that's something you can do. So maybe even just taking a shower or laying in a bath could be beneficial for you here. And then you're actually supposed to grind these down a little bit with a pumice stone. If you're going to take that pumice stone and kind of rub it down, you could spread it to other areas, so just be very cautious of that. And then you apply the salicylic acid on top of it. And this is meant to be used for not days, not hours, but for weeks you need to do this. So at least 4 weeks to see results with salicylic acid, and sometimes even 8 weeks, sometimes even 12 weeks to see results. You're basically using this until your wart resolves.
Yeah, so I mean, the end point is really your own. If you notice that the wart is gone, I mean, that's the time you should probably stop. There's no consistent, like, you do this for 4 weeks and you're done. And that's kind of the theme for all of these. Like, almost any destructive method, it's either there or it's not, and there's not like a clear time end point.
So salicylic acid is going to be your best at-home treatment option for this, and it's been widely proven to be successful, and so it's probably your first best step at home outside of your duct tape. So let's talk about maybe even put salicylic acid and duct tape together. You know, something you could certainly do. But let's talk about what you're going to see if you go to the dermatology office. I would say about 90% of the times the treatment of choice is going to be cryotherapy, also known as using liquid nitrogen to freeze your wart.
So liquid nitrogen is ridiculously cold. You'll actually see it on the Food Network these days when they make these little frozen desserts, but that's aside. Forget I ever mentioned that. This is negative 196 degrees Celsius or negative 320 degrees Fahrenheit. It is way colder than your at-home freeze things, which exist. I think Dr. Scholl's has them, but this is far, far, far colder and therefore far more destructive and therefore far more effective. There are multiple different ways to do this. I personally like to use this little very fine needle tip, again, to try to localize the treatment, but different dermatologists do it in a different way. Caveat, I explain this to my patients all the time. I'm going to see you every 4 weeks for quite a long period of time. If you catch the wart early and it's tiny, you might be one and done. For the feet, the hands especially, it's going to take multiple treatments. So have that expectation in mind. That's the number one frustration I see from patients. It's not that the wart doesn't go away. It's that they didn't think that they would have to come back so many times.
So by freezing it, you're basically destroying all the tissue around it. There are good studies that suggest, and this is what I do in the office, is that you have to freeze it for a little bit longer. That means like freezing it for like 20 seconds, 10 seconds. You really want to be holding it. It's not like a quick flash freeze. You got to freeze it for longer. And the main downside of this is that it's quite painful. So when we have young kids that come in the office, and these are the people that are often coming in for warts, it is really painful. It's something that they dread quite a bit to have done, because not only does it hurt while it's freezing, it also hurts while it's thawing, and that process can be very uncomfortable. But, a lot of the kids that come in, they're quite brave. They're able to kind of tough it through. But it certainly is something that's uncomfortable. You're going to have to come in for many treatments. And in the healing process, don't be alarmed if the skin does blister up. This is because your skin cells are dead now in that area, and they blister and kind of slough off. And so that's how it works. And this is probably the most common treatment that you'll see when you go to see a dermatologist.
And so like you mentioned, for especially kids, like it's just, it's not fun going through this, even though sometimes it feels quite necessary. So an option you'll also see used quite frequently if you go to an office is a cantharidin, beetle juice, blister juice, whatever you want to call it. This is from the Lida vesiculata is the name of the beetle, and their juice actually is cytotoxic. It causes the skin to blister up at a set depth, and so it is destructive. Now the nice thing about this, it doesn't hurt when you put it on. You actually can put it on, occlude it, wash it off later, and then the blister forms later. So you don't have that immediate negative feedback that makes that office visit just like such a difficult thing to get through.
Absolutely. So it's just a little painless, like it'd be the equivalent of just dropping water onto your skin. Completely painless, but then it does blister up afterwards, and that's how it works. It's the blistering beetle, so it blisters off the skin and then it sloughs off. Now, this is something that is no longer available in the US to purchase, but you can, as a dermatologist, purchase it from Canada and then use it on your patients. And so this is something that I have some of the dermatologists that train us use this quite a bit. Some people don't use this one at all. This is depending on essentially your preference and whether or not. But for kids, this is something that people prefer because it's not as painful. The next option would be curettage and cautery or electrodesiccation. So basically this works is that we will scrape it down, and usually it's pretty painless to scrape down a wart for most patients, but you can numb beforehand, scrape it down, and then basically burn it with an electric needle. You could do that. I'm personally not a huge fan of it because when we know that smoke plume is aerosolizing HPV around the entire room, and even if you're wearing an N95, you could protect against most of that aerosolized HPV in the air, but some people can get respiratory papillomatosis. They can get warts in their respiratory tract from doing this, and so something that I personally don't love doing, and would only use if there was a smoke evacuator and an N95 mask.
Yeah, I also don't utilize this too much. Again, like Dr. Sloss said, but interestingly, HPV is fairly heat stable, so you can actually burn it, aerosolize it, and it's still viable and can infect in the smoke, whereas it's more susceptible to damage through cold temperatures, and then you don't deal with that consequence.
Last here from the destructive category would be lasers. And there are two ways that you can go after this, because like we said, if you know what causes it, you know how to treat it. So because these are hyperkeratotic skin cells, you could simply use a laser that's ablative of skin cells. So that would be CO2 or erbium. And then the other option is, because this has that angiogenesis, because it has those blood vessels in it that you can see, you can actually target the blood vessels using something like PDL. And that kind of treats, like, I guess the source, like it's going after like the life supply of the wart. And I know some dermatologists that actually do this.
Yeah, I do see PDL and vascular laser used, I think, a little more often than destructive lasers. Some studies show it's quite effective. Other studies, again, show some modest benefit. The data is always kind of a big range when when it comes to warts, but this is not something that everyone does, not something that's widely available, but it can be performed at an office.
The next category is virucidal, meaning that you're actually killing the HPV virus that's inside the warts. Now, these are kind of hit or miss because it's very difficult to kill this virus because it's like kind of so embedded into that wart that it's very difficult to kill the actual virus that's causing it. It doesn't mean that the warts go away right away anyway. So they're basically like kind of like hiding in there the way that they're built. So you have a few options here.
So the one I'd heard the most about in this category is intralesional cytofovir. This is an antiviral medication. You can inject it into the wart. The data doesn't strongly support it, but from professional anecdote, meaning that other doctors and dermatologists have told me their experience, some people state really good success with this. Again, it's going to be pretty hard to find, and then there are a couple other options here as well.
The other options here are things like glutaraldehyde or even formaldehyde. I think these are very uncommonly used, so we'll just kind of skip over these because I don't really know any dermatologists that use these, but there may be some, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. Let's move on to the next category, which is anti-mitotic. So let me explain briefly what this is. So basically, your skin cells, in order for these warts to form, they're basically having to replicate rapidly to produce all these skin cells. And if you're able to stop mitosis, which is essentially the replication and division of your cells, you're able to stop the warts from growing. And so there are some very effective anti-mitotic agents that could be used to keep your warts from growing and eventually kill them off.
So, first of which, bleomycin is probably the most potent in this category. This is one I actually have seen used regularly. Again, most dermatologists don't use it because there are side effects associated with it, but it can be extremely effective. Like just from my anecdote, from my personal experience, professional experience, it can be very effective, but always just talk to your doctor if it's even something they would do. Most will not, but it's a really good option on occasion.
Yeah, so bleomycin, I've had some dermatologists I work with use bleomycin. I've used it on some people who have really recalcitrant, meaning warts that just will not resolve. It can be quite painful to use, but at the same time, it is extremely effective for some patients. Now, this wouldn't be a doctorly video if we didn't mention retinoids here. So retinoids have actually been shown to be effective in treating warts. So it has anti-proliferative benefits. It helps with division of cells. It can be normalizing proliferation. And so there's some studies that show that retinoids can actually be quite effective here. So not a bad option.
Yeah, there it is. Script for warts. I'm just kidding. It's not, but it is. It's pretty wild how broad the benefits from retinoids are. You talk about carcinogenesis, talk about warts, even molluscum. Like this is just a wildly versatile ingredient.
All right, so let's move on to our last category, which would be that immunotherapy category. I don't know if some overlap here with the anti-mitotic category, but let's move into that immunotherapy where your immune system essentially is going to then be killing itself. So it can either be going after the virus or it can be going after the skin cells that have now hyper-proliferated.
I guess the one I see most in this category would probably be the 5-fluorouracil. This is a antimetabolite that affects the ability of rapidly dividing cells to rapidly divide. And so it's been used for cutaneous squamous cell carcinoma, advanced squamous cell carcinoma in a different route, like IV or parentally. And then for warts, because they divide so rapidly, it can be used here as well. I think this one is probably used as far as uncommon treatments relatively commonly, if that makes any sense. Like you might find someone who can do this for you, but it has some decent benefits and is probably one of the more studied options.
Yeah, and it could be either used topically or it could be injected into the skin. So this is something that's going to be up to your dermatologist. Another thing that falls into this category is something called imiquimod. So imiquimod is something that locally boosts your own immune system. We sometimes use these for different types of skin cancers and different types of precancerous lesions. And basically the way that it works is you put it on the skin, it's not injected, it's applied topically, and your own immune system gets boosted in this area, and by boosting the immune system in this area, it's able to kind of kill anything that it's applied to. And so some people use these on warts with varying degrees of success, but again, this is a painless option. So for a lot of people, it is used in their armamentarium for the treatment of warts.
Right, and this one's actually FDA approved for genital warts, used off-label occasionally for just other cutaneous warts. Effectiveness, hit or miss. I personally have not had meaningful results, especially with the cutaneous non-genital warts with this, but it's worth a try sometimes because they are so stubborn.
And then another option, which is if your dermatologist suggested this to you, you'd probably think to yourself, like, this seems relatively insane, but it does seem to work with varying degrees of efficacy. Like we said, with kind of all these wart treatments, it's always very difficult to get it perfectly right. But this is injecting Candida or even mumps antigen. So basically they take an antigen, they inject it into the wart, and by injecting it into the wart, it basically hyperactivates your immune system against this antigen that your body recognizes as foreign, so Candida, which is a yeast. And then by doing that, your immune system says, hey, we don't want any of these warts on the body, and it can go around and cause your body to kill all the warts on your entire body. So if somebody has widespread warts, you can inject Candida antigen into a wart, and it could cause all of the warts to disappear. And so there are some derms, again, who swear by this Candida antigen.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these immunomodulatory ones, you kind of have like these wildly exceptional, incredible results occasionally, and then you have just non-responders. But because if your immune system turns on, recognizes the virus, like you can get just clearance, like all over.
Right. And this is how a lot of the different treatments for molluscum work as well, is that we hope that your immune system just suddenly recognizes molluscum and then you never form a molluscum again. This is kind of the hope here too with some of the treatments of warts. If you have widespread warts, if you can get your body to say, hey, I don't like this HPV virus, I'm going to kill it, then that's probably going to be the best way to do it, which is why the last category here is actually vaccine. So there is a vaccine that has been developed for sexually transmitted form of HPV, those high-risk serotypes, those cancer-forming causes of HPV. And it's widely available, it's widely recommended, and it seems to be quite effective at preventing cervical cancer in people. And so this is something that if you were to get the vaccine and you already have warts, especially genital warts, because these are usually targeted at those high-risk serotypes and not the low-risk serotypes, it could get rid of your existing warts because now your immune system says, hey, I don't like these things anymore, and I want to get rid of them. Now, this hasn't been proven in many studies yet, so it's kind of still up in the air where the science is on this, but sometimes getting vaccinated against HPV can get rid of your genital warts.
Right, and this is the exception to the rule, and it won't work consistently for everyone, but again, like Dr. said, there are some studies starting to show that even post-infectious vaccination may have some benefits. We may put a link here down to the society guidelines of the windows of vaccination for this, because it does actually change relatively frequently. That way you can see like where you fall, will it be covered by insurance? Are you outside the window? And then it becomes a bit of a hurdle, always changing guidelines. So we might just link that below. It might be the easiest thing to do.
Right. And the reason why this category is really important, we'll probably talk about genital warts in further detail at some point, is because high-risk HPV can cause cervical cancer. It can cause cervical dysplasia and can cause many, many issues in women. And so it's something just to be aware of, something to consider, and why it's very important to get pap smears and watch this stuff closely.
So there's actually an oral pill here that may work as well, oral cimetidine. This is kind of one of those dirty drugs. And if you don't know what that means, it means that it actually affects a lot of different things. It doesn't have like a clear, clean, focused mode of action. But cimetidine, through multiple mechanisms, might actually help your immune system turn on, recognize the virus. Again, personal anecdote, like it has not worked great. Some studies similarly, like it works well, it doesn't work at all. So this is another treatment you may encounter in the office.
Right. And I when I was in medical school, I worked with a pediatrician who swore by this and would prescribe it to a bunch of patients. Evidence is sort of hit or miss here. So if this is something that they recommend to you, it does have some side effects that are worth noting, but maybe it's worth trying if it's something you want to get rid of, because you have to remember that you don't have to treat warts. So, when you're trying to evaluate whether or not you want to do something, you could say, maybe I don't even want to treat this at all, and so is it worth it to take an oral medication like cimetidine? That's going to be up to you. After listening to this video, you're probably thinking, wow, this is a slew of options out there. I don't even know where to start. Where does the evidence point? And the problem is that when it comes to warts, this is one of the things in medicine that, despite it being one of the first described conditions ever in medicine historically, going back to like ancient times, despite the fact that it's been around for so long, we don't have any treatments yet that are like slam dunk treatments for this. And so when you come to see a dermatologist, we'll try to make like our sort of the doctorly recommendation for this right now. But again, doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So I would say if you're at home, the best option to start with is go for the salicylic acid or the duct tape.
Yeah, those are going to be your two most effective over-the-counter options. And also in this category, I don't really know where to put this, but because it is kind of evidence-based, it does have multiple mechanisms of action, but it is like this at-home hack. It seems kind of wives-tale-y, but green tea. Topical green tea extract actually does have some properties that can be used useful for warts. There are multiple studies showing that it could be helpful. Again, more in the genital wart space than the non-genital wart space, but in extracts, in the catechins, in who knows? Like, this could be something that helps. Well, it seems fairly innocuous. I actually have recommended it on occasion because there's not much downside. But I don't think it's going to be widely effective. But that's your at-home beginning foundational treatment choices, and then everything else is probably going to be in the office.
So that would be our recommendation. Now, if you come see us in the office, then I would say there's a bunch of different things you could do. I'll tell you what I do when you see me. The first time, I might give it a really, really good freeze. So I'm gonna freeze it for probably longer than most people are, just because I want to see some good results with it. The second time, if you don't resolve with that alone, I go to town. That's some combination of numbing, scraping, freezing, and then also sending you home with some type of at-home treatment that's a prescription. And so that's what I do when you come to see me. I could be quite aggressive just to get the results rapidly, because it is frustrating for people to come, take a day off or half a day off from work to come to see the office to get a treatment that they perceive as not working just because they didn't see results with it completely yet. And so I try to expedite that a little bit. But yeah, with warts, there's no guaranteed answer.
Right. So again, it's all personalized to you. Like, what's the location? What's the scarring? What's the risk? But again, these are doctor conversations you're actually going to have in the office. So this is kind of your foundation for wart treatments from beginning to end. It's really comprehensive. I feel like this is a really long video, but hopefully it was helpful for you, and at least arms you to know when you need to go to the office and what you can do at home before you just kind of make that commitment.
And it kind of explains what some of the treatments are in the office. So if you went to see your dermatologist and they recommended injecting Candida antigen into your skin, you can kind of understand why they did it and the mechanism and the thought process under which this could be beneficial for you. And we'll try to summarize this article, everything that we said in this video, in an article on Skinpedia, just to make it simplified for you so that you can kind of scroll through different treatments, understand how they work, and then also see our final recommendation. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.
We'll see you next time.